Hello, boys and girls of all ages. I want to welcome you to another in our continuing study of the prophets of God. Prophets are men and women whom God speaks to and gives them a message and tells the prophet to go and give God's message to the people. Sometimes that message is a wonderful message, like God giving the message to the prophet Isaiah that Jesus Christ would eventually come and we would be born of the Virgin Mary. Then there are other sad stories about how God's people did bad things and God was going to punish them. So today is one of those stories in which God uses a prophet to tell the people that God is going to punish them. And the name of our prophet today is Jeremiah. And Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet because he had to witness the downfall and the destruction of God's people in Jerusalem and Judea, and how God put them in a timeout. Well, in our last study, we heard the story of the prophet Habakkuk. And Habakkuk looked around in Jerusalem and the nation of Judea, and he saw that many of the people were mistreating each other, and they were treating each other badly, and they weren't following the commandments of God to love God and to love one's neighbor as they love themselves. So Habakkuk got very angry at God and said, God, what are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about these people that aren't obeying your commandments? Well, Habakkuk was shocked when God said that he was going to bring the Babylonians, the enemy of the people of Judea, and the Babylonians were going to come and they were going to be the ones to punish the people on behalf of God. So today we're going to hear the story about Jeremiah. And he follows in the footsteps of Habakkuk. So we're going to start out with a desert-looking backdrop, and part of it takes place in Jerusalem, and part of it takes place in Babylon. So we have our city of Jerusalem with its big walls and the temple in the middle of it. And then over on the other side, we have the city of Babylon, which was also a big major city, and they had huge armies. Well, God had said exactly what he was going to do, and God told the king of Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar, to take his army and to take it to Jerusalem and Judea and to punish the people and to put them into a timeout. Have you ever been punished by your parents or your grandparents and put into timeout? Maybe you had to sit in a corner, or maybe you had to just sit in a chair or sit on your bed for a length of time so that you could think about the bad things that you had done wrong, and so maybe think about the things that you might do right. So that would be a punishment. So God was going to put the people in a timeout. So we have the prophet of Jeremiah, and we have the king, and his name is Zedekiah, King Zedekiah of Judah. And Jeremiah kept telling Zedekiah that God was going to come and punish the people of Judea and Jerusalem for not obeying God and doing what God commanded. So we have King Zedekiah, and we have the prophet Jeremiah, and then we have the people of Jerusalem and Judea. Well, so the Babylonian army of King Nebuchadnezzar came to Jerusalem and besieged the city. And that, when we use the word besiege, we meant that they surrounded the city and they surrounded the people so that they couldn't escape. And so that they could wait out until the people got hungry, and then they would have to surrender, or that they would have to be destroyed. Well, Jeremiah was told by God to go and tell King Nebuchadnezzar and the people that God was going to punish them and take them into exile, into a timeout in the kingdom of Babylon and Mesopotamia. But King Nebuchadnezzar got very angry, and so he had Jeremiah thrown into a well, and until he repented, or until he changed his mind. Well, after a period of time, the king called Jeremiah back and says, "Do you have any new message from God? Is God going to defeat the Babylonians?" Well, Jeremiah said, "No, God is still going to punish the people, and that King Zedekiah and all the people would be taken prisoner and would be taken captive into the land of Babylon." Well, King Zedekiah got very mad again, and so he had Jeremiah thrown into prison. And there he waited and he waited and he waited. But then he let Jeremiah out again. And this time Jeremiah spoke to the people. And he told the people that they needed to go quietly into exile and to go to Babylon into their timeout, and to build houses and plant gardens, and to have children and marry, and that God was going to eventually forgive them and bless them, and that their time out would last for 70 years. But after 70 years, God would defeat the Babylonians, and then the people could go back to their home, and God would bless them. And God said to Jeremiah, and Jeremiah to the people, that God loved them, and though God was going to punish them, that God was going to make a new covenant with them. That right now they had a heart of stone and they weren't obeying God, but God was going to take that heart of stone out of their chest and give them a beating heart of flesh, and so that they would come to know God and obey God's commandments. So that's what happened. The Babylonian army took King Zedekiah prisoner into Babylon and took all of the people into a timeout, into exile in Babylon. And only a few people were left behind, along with Jeremiah. And Jeremiah saw that the Babylonian army, they totally destroyed the city of Jerusalem. They burned the walls and they burned the temple. And so Jeremiah sat down and he wept and he cried because God had punished the people. And God made it so that the people had to stay in Babylon for 70 years, and they could not return to their home in Jerusalem and Judea. So there's the story of the prophet of Jeremiah and the weeping prophet and how he told the people that they were going to go into exile, into a time of timeout, God's punishment to the people. So now let's talk about some wonder questions. And I invite you, after each question, to pause the video and think about how you might answer the questions. And remember that this is not a test, so there's no right or wrong answer. So however you answer the questions will be an okay answer. So the first question I have is, if I wonder if you think the timeout was a good thing for the people of God. Was the timeout a good thing? Did they deserve it? I wonder why the people of Israel and Judah needed a timeout. Do you remember any part of the story in which they might have done wrong and that they needed to be in a timeout? I wonder if you think God was right to give them a timeout. Was it the right thing to do to punish them and put them into timeout? God told the people they would be in a timeout for 70 years. I wonder what is the longest time that you've ever had to be in timeout. God told the people they could return home after their timeout. I wonder if they learned how to obey God when they returned home. I wonder what it felt like for them to return home after being gone so long. I wonder what is the longest time you've been away from home. And finally, I wonder how many of you ever had to move away from a place that you called home. So there are some questions that you might want to ponder. Now let's talk about some crafts that can go with the story. And one of the things that you might want to consider is just taking a piece of paper and a pencil and some crayons or markers and just draw and color a picture of your favorite part of this story, or the part of the story that you liked best. And also, if you go online on the computer, and if you type in the word Prophet Jeremiah, you can find some pictures, some coloring pictures. And so I found a few pictures that maybe you might be able to find too. So this is a picture. This is Jeremiah, and this is King Zedekiah and his counselors. And Jeremiah had written down all that God had told him, and he had put it on a scroll. Well, when the scroll was given to Zedekiah, he tore it up and he put it in a fire and burned it. So here's the scroll here, and he's tearing it up and he's throwing it into a fire. Here's another picture that I found, and at the bottom it says, "Exile is coming." And it's Jeremiah calling out to God and asking God to forgive the people. And he's got tears coming out of his eyes. He's the weeping prophet. He's a prophet that cries for the people. Then I found another picture that's a color by number picture. And it has to do with the scroll that the prophet Jeremiah wrote down the prophecies of God. And all of the different numbers, you can barely see them, but there's yellow, red, dark blue, orange, gold, light blue, yellow, tan, purple, pink, green, and gray. So you can maybe find this picture and color it by the numbers. Then the last picture I found is one of the soldiers of the Babylonians, and this is King Zedekiah, and his crown is laying here on the ground, and he's all chained up, and he's being taken captive into time out to Babylon. So there are some coloring pages that you might be able to find on your computer on the internet. And if you need help, ask your parents or your grandparents to help you to try to find these coloring pages. Well, I thought about some crafts and also some games. And one of the things that I thought about was, in the story, we heard about how the prophet Jeremiah had made King Zedekiah mad, and that King Zedekiah had put him into a well, like a prison. And so what I did was I took some paper cups, and I found a picture of a pattern of stones. Wells are often lined with stones and or bricks. So these are like 3 wells. So this is kind of like what's called a shell game. So, and then I have a cotton ball. And so I call this game Find Jeremiah. And so you have to figure out which well Jeremiah is. And this is a game that you can play with your parents or your grandparents or some of your friends. So the cotton ball is Jeremiah, and he's going into the well. So then you have people close their eyes, and then you mix up the different cups or the different wells, and then you have them try to figure out which one of the wells that Jeremiah is in. And see, he's not in that one. Nope, he's not in that one either. So that must mean that Jeremiah is in this well. And so that's kind of a craft in that you cover the cup with a pattern that is a stone pattern like a well, but it's also a game. So maybe that's something that you might want to do. Then another game is that God had put the people into time out, into exile in Babylon. So what I found, is I took a box and I found on the computer a picture, and this is what they think the city of Babylon looked like. So this box represents the city of Babylon. And so you can either take some cotton balls, like I have here, or you can take some like Legos. And so I have some Legos. And so what you're going to do, this is kind of a toss-in game. So you're going to put the people, or toss them, into timeout or into exile. So you put it as far away as you want to. So the box is way far away, and then you toss the objects or toss the cotton balls into timeout. And see, and maybe move the box farther away every time until it gets hard to toss the people or the cotton balls or the Legos into the timeout. So there's another game that you might be able to play. And ask either, if you're going to use cotton balls, ask permission from your parents or your grandparents if you can use them, because sometimes they use cotton balls for other things, and they might not like it if you use the cotton balls. So ask for permission to use the cotton balls. So there's the story of the weeping prophet Jeremiah, and how he told God's people that they would be put into a timeout, into exile in Babylon. But God still loved them, and God would take care of them in the exile, in their timeout, and that God would still love them and would take care of them when their timeout was up. So I hope you enjoyed this story, and I look forward to seeing you again for another story, exciting story about the prophets of God. God's peace, and have a blessed and wonderful day.